Hi everybody, this is Rickard Bengtsson for AE Tuts Plus. What we're doing today is a super slow motion Twixtor tutorial, specifically for DSLR cameras. What is Twixtor, you may ask? Well, Twixtor is a plugin for After Effects and a few other programs that interpolates video footage and creates much better slow motion than any other plugin or effect out there. Usually you'd use what is known as a phantom camera to create super slow motion footage. But Twixtor is a great way to, on a budget, get fairly close to the same results. Okay, here we are in Photoshop, and here's a very brief little presentation that I put together. So, getting the most out of your DSLR for Twixtor is the name of the tutorial. Now we're just going to go through a few of the settings for the cameras. Now, one important thing to note is that this video is being recorded in March 2012. So the settings of the cameras are based on the actual cameras that are out there today. This might change quite a bit in the coming months or years, so if you're watching this in the future, yeah, it's a bit old-fashioned, but it's what we have at the moment. So, shutter speed is one of the most important settings on your camera. The camera I used was a Canon EOS 550D or a T2i. And the maximum shutter speed you can use on that camera is 4000 or 1/4000th of a second. This basically means that the higher your shutter speed is, the less motion blur you will have in your footage. And the less motion blur you have, the sharper your image will be, and therefore you will get greater results using Twixtor. So let's move into aperture. f1.8 is the lowest setting on the lens that I was using, and this doesn't have as much to do with the actual quality of the Twixtor footage. This just means that it will be easier for you to fix problems in post. Basically, with the lower aperture you will have more shallow depth of field, and that would mean that your subject would be in focus and your background will be out of focus. And this means that Twixtor will have an easier time handling the difference between what should be in slow motion and the background, which should be left alone, and it won't cause as much warping. ISO is another one of those settings that doesn't actually have anything to do with the quality of the Twixtor footage, it's just the quality of the video. And the lower your ISO is, the less noise you will have and the cleaner it will look. So basically, if you're shooting in daylight, you can keep the ISO low, but if you're shooting in darkness or at nighttime, you will have to bump up the ISO, and that will cause more grain in your video, and that will, one, look ugly, and two, it will be harder for Twixtor to handle it and cause more problems with warping and ghosting. Now we move into the biggest thing, which is frames per second, or frame rate. Now the highest I can shoot on my camera, which again is the 550D, is 60 frames per second, and that's in 720p resolution. If you go up to 1080p, you can only shoot in 30 at the highest. My recommendation is to always shoot the highest frame rate possible, because basically the more frames you have from the beginning, the less guesswork Twixtor has to do. So if you're shooting in 60 FPS, it's much better than shooting in 30 or even lower. So if there are cameras out there there are a few that can shoot 120 at the moment, and I'm sure there will be cameras that can shoot much higher frame rate in an acceptable resolution in the coming time. So the higher your frame rate, the better the results will be. That's the rule. Just a quick recap. Shutter speed should always be as high as possible to limit the motion blur in the original video footage. Aperture as low as possible to create the shallow depth of field, which is one, a beautiful look that everybody wants these days, and two, it will be easier for Twixtor to handle. ISO should also be as low as possible, and that mainly has to do with the grain and making the video look clean. Frame rate should always be as high as possible to ensure that you have the maximum amount of frames in the beginning to create better results using Twixtor. Here we have a few other tips. If you have a lot of camera movement, basically if you're going handheld, you will have more problems in post-production. Detailed background will also have more problems in post-production, and again that has to do with aperture. If your background is out of focus, it will be less detailed, and therefore it will be easier for Twixtor to handle. Now, water, fire, smoke, particles, and that kind of thing is one of the hardest things to do, which is one of the reasons that my video got so much publicity, because it was using water, which is known as one of the hardest things out there. And always when shooting you should plan for post-production, and after watching this tutorial you'll know more about what kind of things to think about, and I've mentioned a few of them already, with keeping a simple background and not moving around the camera so much. So if you can, you should always shoot with your camera steady, and then you can add some kind of camera movement in post, or if you need to, try not to move it around as much or as fast, just to make your life easier in post-production. So with all that covered, I think we're ready to jump into After Effects and do some work with one of the files. Alright, now that we got that boring technical stuff out of the way, we're in After Effects and we're ready to have some fun. So I'm just going to drag in a piece of footage, which is a scene from the Winding Stairs music video, and drag it into the project window. So the first thing you do is you drag in footage that ideally was shot in 60 frames per second or even more if you can, and then you're going to convert that footage into the actual frame rate you want the video to be. Now, I've already done this step and exported the video in the right frame rate, but here's how you would do it. You drag in your footage, go to Interpret Footage Main, and then here it would say something like 60 FPS or 59.94. And what you want to do is just say conform to frame rate and put in 23.976 or whatever your output frame rate would be. So it could be 25 frames or 30 frames per second, whatever you want it to be. I'm just going to go with 24 here and hit OK. Now with that done, you take the video and drag it to the create new composition icon, and there you go. Now we have a composition with our file, and we have nothing happening. Guy comes in, jumps, flies through the air, and goes out the frame. And then we have nothing for quite a while. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to trim out the bits that we don't want and just have the part of him flying through the air. So we're going to move up the time indicator, go to, yeah, around here somewhere. I'm going to drag the work area, boom. Go to around here-ish and drag the end. So now with that selected, we just right click the work area and say trim comp to work area. Now all we have is a composition of just him going through the air and nothing else, which is exactly what we want. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go up to composition settings, and the composition is 2 seconds and 12 frames long, and we're gonna have to extend it a bit. So the length doesn't really matter, just put in some kind of high number. I'll just go 5 minutes. So the composition will be 5 minutes, 2 seconds and 2 frames. Hit OK, and we have a long composition with footage for the first 2 seconds, and then we have nothing, which is what we want. So you're gonna take the footage, hit layer, pre-compose, and the important thing here is to move all attributes into a new composition, and you can just name it whatever you want. I'm gonna put in footage is a good name and hit OK. Now it's time to add some Twixtor to this, so we're gonna go Effect, Revision Plugins, Twixtor Pro, and let's just go through the settings a bit. So the source is fine, and we're going to use our own footage as the source, and input frame rate is one of the most important controls here. It says 29.970, which is not right at all. What you want to do is this frame rate should match the frame rate of your footage. So when you want to interpret footage main, the frame rate you put in there should say the exact same thing here. So we're going to put 23.976. And there you go. Motion vectors best. You can put it down lower if you want to have quicker rendering times. I'll just keep it to best for now. Image prep, contrast edge enhancement is a good thing to have on. It's just going to analyze it a bit beforehand and cache last motion as well. Now time remap mode should be speed. Yes, that is the thing that we want to change, and the speed right now is at 100%. So if you just play the file, it's going to play back the exact same speed as before. Nothing has happened yet. So the thing about Twixtor is that you can slow it down to like 50%, like you would on a normal slowing down thing. Actually, it doesn't look that bad right here, but the thing that you can do, and the thing that I did for all my clips, is that you slow it down to the point where it's almost not moving, so it's almost a still image, and that way you won't get all the warping and all the problems that Twixtor can cause. Because I'm sure a lot of you have seen the various ghosting and warping problems if you've tried it out on footage yourself. Especially if you don't have the right settings from the beginning when shooting the video, you can get a lot of weird warping and that kind of stuff. And that is exactly what you don't want, and one of the reasons my video got so big is because it had surprisingly little of that stuff compared to most other videos out at the time. So what you do is on speed you put in a very low number like 2%, and then it's going to be a very slow video, and you won't even, I mean, it was 2 seconds before it, and now we're up to 50 seconds before it reaches mid-air. So what you can do is you just move up the work area a bit to the middle somewhere, and by the way, if you hit B, you're going to move the in point of your work area, or the beginning of your work area, and then if you go before, you can hit N and you'll move the end of your work area. So now we have let's move it up a bit. Now we have a small section of footage with him going through there, and it's going very slowly. As you can see, he's going very slowly by in there, and this is one of the reasons you don't get to see all the problems, because he's moving such a small section through the air. You have a bit of problems here, but if he's moving a small section through the air, you won't see all the problems. Now, here's what I'm talking about. In this area, you can see that there's a lot of weird warping issues at the moment with this, and this is because his foot is going over the building, and Twixtor doesn't really know that the building is in the background and the guy is in the foreground. So the edges of his legs and the building blend together and create this weird warping effect, and this is not good. This is exactly the thing you want to stay away from. But this is the way it looks at the moment, and there are stages we can do to get rid of that. The first thing we can do is we can look over the Twixtor settings a bit more. So frame interp, you can use nearest blend or motion width. Motion width blend is the one that I usually use, which usually creates a bit better results. And then the warping, you have a few different options here as well. Now you can see that there are a few with inverse with smart blend and forward with or without smart blend. Now smart blend sounds like a pretty smart thing to me, so ideally you probably want to use that, so I'm gonna switch it over to inverse with smart blend, and let's see if that fixes our issues. Whoa. Okay, we're back. As you saw, I had a bit of a After Effects crash right there with switching over to inverse with smart blend. So yeah, we're back at least. What I did was switch over to inverse with smart blend, and let's see if that fixed our problems. I'm just gonna save this file beforehand so I don't have any crashes again and lose all my work. So let's see. Well, it made it better. It's maybe, I don't think it is as bad as before, because now it seems to be concentrated to a smaller area around the foot instead of having it around the whole leg. Obviously it's still not perfect, it's pretty far from perfect at the moment, I'd say, but I think we're getting closer. So let's just leave that for now, and then we can see motion blur compensation is something you can turn up if you want to. It maybe sometimes it has sort of a too strong embossed type look, so I usually leave it pretty low. One can work. You get sort of this crisp halo-like effect around his head right here and on the legs. I don't know, maybe that's something that you like or that you want to have. I'm gonna keep it a bit lower. Just enhances the edges a little bit and makes it look a bit sharper and crisper. Okay, now we have the main layer, and here we have a sensitivity setting. It defaults to 70 and usually that works quite well. You can try, if you turn it up, you can usually get some better results. At least that has been the case in my experience. If you turn it very low, you get this ghosting effect that I think we're all used to seeing with slow motion footage, where we have multiple frames overlapping in opacity differences, and this is the look that looks like cheap, bad slow motion. And what Twixtor does so great is that it doesn't have this look. If you just turn it up to 70, you don't have the overlapping opacity ghosting effect anymore. Instead you have the warping, but there are ways of getting around that. So I'm gonna put it up to 100 because I think that has a little bit better results. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a small section of this footage. I'm just gonna take from around, yeah. Let's just take the work area that we have right now, and I'm gonna right click and trim comp to work area. So now we're just working with this kind of footage and not all of it that we had before. I'm gonna save it again. And now we're ready to do some removing warping problem issue time. So let's just go through and see what are the actual problems with this footage. Well, the legs is a big thing. That's probably the biggest thing actually. His whole lower half over here on the things as well. It's warping all over the lower half of his body. So that is problems that we need to fix, and also we have some problems with his head going through the boat here when he reaches that far. But I think we're gonna just focus on this side of his body for now at least, and see what we can do with that. So here comes the big secret of Twixtor, or my big secret, and that is that there really is no one-stop effect or one thing you can do to fix all the issues. Really, it all comes down to standard rotoscoping techniques. That is nothing advanced. It's just a matter of how much time and how much effort you're willing to put into it to get good results. And I've had a lot of people asking me, how do you get so good and so clean Twixtor footage? And really, it just comes down to very standard, very basic After Effects masking, and that is really all you need to know. So what can we do with this? As I said, his whole lower body is really the issue. That it's not concentrated to one place, even though this foot is probably the worst of all. It's not just this that is the problem, it's his whole lower half. So what I ended up doing for this shot in the final video was that I took out his whole lower half and replaced it with some working footage without the warping, and then rebuilt his legs. Now that might sound a bit complex, but really it's very easy to do, and I'm gonna show you how to do it right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the footage. We're actually gonna pre-compose it again to not have the Twixtor on the layer, but have Twixtor inside this composition. So I'm just gonna call this Twixtored footage. So now we just have a clean piece of footage without any effects on it. And we're gonna find a frame where the legs have the least bit of warping, and I think this is pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go edit, duplicate, and then what we're doing is we're going to mask out his legs. So just create a mask around his body. It doesn't have to be super perfect, but the closer you can get, the better the results will be. So I'm just going to go with like something like this. Have a bit of the shirt in there as well. I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, and I think we'll see when we reach the stage where we need to use this footage. just go through this whole part and try and get it as tight as you can without spending too much time on it, getting super mega perfect, because at the end of the day you will have a lot more masking to do, and you don't want to spend all your time on this one step, because you will get tired of it eventually, or probably pretty quickly, because rotoscoping and masking is not the most fun thing you can do in After Effects. So we're going to try to keep the time spent on that as little as possible. Okay, so if we just solo this layer, we have a mask of just his legs. We have a bit of the sky in there that we can take out. We have a mask of just his legs, and what we're going to do is we're going to keyframe this part to move along with his actual legs. So let's just put keyframes for position and rotation. Lower the opacity of background layer. So now we just go through a few steps in the footage and match up the new layer. Oh, you can see there I forgot a step. So what we need to do with this file is that we have the mask ready on this frame, but the footage moves. So I forgot I actually need to do a freeze frame of it. So right click the footage on the frame where you have your mask, go to time, freeze frame. Now we have just his legs frozen in air with a mask around it. So now we're good to go. So we set keyframes for position and rotation on this frame. Now we turn on the other layer, and we're just going to go through the footage and try to line up this new layer with the background video footage, so the legs sort of match the same position. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it just needs to be sort of close. So now the legs move with him, and then we go to the end and do the same thing. Now this is a good thing about slowing it down so much, is that we have 21 seconds of a guy flying through the air, and we only had to set 3 keyframes, or actually we probably could have gone by with even less. But we have a few amount of keyframes following his motion, which means we don't have to spend as much time on this. Now we have his frozen legs following him in air. Just rename this footage to legs, and then we can color code that some color to better keep them in check. So let's turn up, I just turned down the opacity for the background layer, by the way, but let's turn that back up again. So I turned off the legs layer. So now what we're going to do is that we need to somehow take out the legs. So and the buildings, you can see there's a lot of warping right here, which is what we don't want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the original footage and drag it in. And as you know from before, we had a few seconds in the beginning of him before he reaches the end point of the layer. We have a few seconds of nothing really going on, and we have that at the end as well. And this is one of those things that I talked about before, is that plan for post-production, and one of the things you can do with that is make sure you get a clean plate of the background, and this is what's known as a clean plate, with just the background. Nothing that's supposed to move is in the frame, we just have the background. Now of course this is in its original timing, which means that it's much faster than our slow motion footage. So what we can do is we can either add Twixtor to it and slow it down, or we can just freeze frame it. Because our Twixtor footage is so slow, if we freeze frame this, it will look like it's sort of playing back at the same speed, and we don't really have anything in the frame that's supposed to move a lot anyway. We have a few people walking on this side, and some people working on a boat here. But we don't really have anything that's supposed to move in the frame. So a freeze frame works just as well as if we were to slow it down, and this also renders much faster. So that's just 2 for 1 why this is better, because it's faster and renders faster as well. So I'm just going to rename this layer to background, and I'm just going to color code this as well. This is a good tip for working with. When you reach complex After Effects files, it's a good way to organize your things by naming them a certain way and color coding them a certain way. That's just a workflow tip, or something you can work out yourself with what kind of colors you want to use for what. So now that we have the background layer on top of the footage, we're just gonna turn it off for now, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a mask right here. I have the layer turned off for now so you can't really see the difference, but we're gonna put a mask, and that's supposed to mask out this whole area of the footage of him going through the air. So I'm gonna put a keyframe, go to the beginning, do the same thing, and to the end as well. Whoop. Turn on the layer, and then what we're going to do is we're going to feather this quite a bit. Oh, you can see we still have some problems in this area. So what you can do is you can either extend this mask or you can make a new mask for just this area. I'm just going to leave it for now, and then we can go into it later if we feel like it. So now if I turn on the other layer, we're going to see that we sort of have him rebuilt already. We have a bit of feathering here because this background layer is so feathered and this one isn't as much, so, or nothing. So we can turn up the feather. I'm just going to put it to like 5. And that's just a better way of blending it with the background right here. 5 or 3 tends to be a good number, I've found, for this kind of stuff. But we still have some issues here, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add a second mask that goes up his body a bit. And this one can have its own feather. So I can go a bit higher, like 15. And then that one will blend a bit better with the background mask. So now we have his legs and part of his shirts built up. Now, the problem with using this technique is that now we have a still frame of his legs flying through the air. And if you look at his arms, they are sort of in the same position throughout, but they are moving a little bit. Or they're moving, yeah, they're moving a little bit. That is one of those small details that you can add so it doesn't look like it's just a still frame, but it needs some movement. And one great way to do that is with the puppet tool. If you just put in a few points for certain parts of his body, you can now it creates keyframes automatically for all the points. So we're on frame 0, and we're just going to go to the end, and we're going to distort the legs a little bit. This doesn't have to move a big amount, and if you move it too much, obviously you're going to get some classic puppet tool looking action. But we just want to add a little bit of motion. Oops. To make sure that it's not just a still frame, it actually has some movement. And we can also adjust the first frame to move down the legs a little bit to make the movement bigger. And there we go. Now you can see that the legs are bending a little bit in air, and if you go back and look at the original footage, you can see that his legs are not completely still throughout. They are moving a little bit and bending at the knees. So that is what we've added now. We've added that back in. So what we can do now is that we can take a look at this problem if we want to. I'm sure you can figure out how to fix it. It's not anything advanced at this point. It's not rebuilding stuff and using puppet tool and that kind of stuff. We're just going to take the background layer and drag it above everything and remove the mask that's on it. Turn off the layer, and then we're gonna create a new mask. And really it's this thing that is the problem. You can see right here it has a bit of warping issues when his body overlaps it. So all I'm gonna do is add a simple mask that sort of follows the shape of his shirt. I'm just gonna put it below the legs actually. And adjust this mask a little bit, put a keyframe, and then it's the same thing over again. Just go through the beginning, adjust the mask, And as you can see, for most of these things we can get by with just using a few keyframes. And if it was higher speed, or if he was moving more and we had more complex stuff going on, we would have to put more masks in. And that is really one of the good things about working with rotoscoping using slow motion footage, is that it doesn't move as much, so you don't have to put as much keyframes because it's not such big movements. He's pretty confined to one area of the screen, which is just around here. Just moving very slowly through that area, which means that we can put simple masks in and not really move them a lot. Then we got put up some feather on that layer as well, so just put to 5. And then we have pretty working lower half of his body, and you can see that we have the issues of his head going through this area, and I could go through that and using masks as well, but really I think you get the point of what I'm doing. And you can see that it's not really that advanced. With just using very simple techniques you can get great quality Twixtor stuff with the right settings on the camera and the right footage. So as long as you follow the guidelines of the information you were given in the beginning of the settings of the camera, and you think about all these things that I've gone through with planning for post-production and making sure the camera isn't moving as much or having simple backgrounds and that kind of stuff, you will pretty fast be able to have good quality Twixtor stuff without spending months or at least hours on it, because nobody likes to rotoscope for that long. So I think that's all I have for now, but I hope you learned stuff from this, and check out more of my Twixtor stuff up on Vimeo. Alright, here's the final effect. I just put some color correction and camera movement and a few of those things to it. So go through the project file and you'll find all the stuff that I added to it, and you can look over that stuff if you want to. Alright, till next time, laters!